On a Sunday afternoon in 1970, 20,000 people walked into the plaza of Yungay, a market town in the Peruvian Andes. Within 4 minutes, most of them were gone. What buried them wasn't the earthquake. It was a wall of ice and rock that broke loose from Peru's tallest mountain, 15 kilometers away, and reached them before anyone understood what was moving. The only people who survived were the 92 visitors to the town's cemetery, a cemetery on a hill built there not for safety, but because that hill had been a burial mound for 1,000 years. The mountain behind your house, the one you have never thought could move, is the same kind of mountain. And on May 31st, 1970, the people of Yungay found out exactly what they had been trusting. The valley where Yungay sits is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. The Callejón de Huaylas is a long Andean corridor carved by the Rio Santa, running between two mountain ranges. The dark Cordillera Negra to the west, and to the east, the Cordillera Blanca, the highest tropical mountain range in the world. At one end of this valley sits Yungay at roughly 2,500 meters. Towering above it, 15 kilometers to the east, is Mount Huascarán, nearly 7,000 meters of ice and rock, more than 4 vertical kilometers higher than the town below. Peruvians call it the highest tropical mountain on Earth. On a clear morning, you could stand in Yungay's plaza and watch the sunlight move slowly down its face. For thousands of years, people had been living in this valley, growing maize in the river-bottom soil. They buried their dead on the hills above town. They learned, the way all people who live next to mountains learn, to treat the mountains as scenery, beautiful, distant, never changing. The mountain had other ideas. In 1725, an earthquake in this range reportedly destroyed parts of the colonial-era settlements in the valley that would later give its name to the region, including Huaraz. In 1962, just 8 years before the disaster that made Yungay famous, a smaller avalanche from the same peak broke loose and buried the neighboring town of Ranrahirca. 4,000 people died along that same track. Survivors reported something unsettling. The avalanche had covered 9.5 miles in 7 minutes, far faster than anyone thought a mountain could move. Locals believed avalanches in the valley always gave 20 or 30 minutes of warning. A cracking sound, then the long whistle of air before the snow came. The 1962 event gave them almost none. Mountaineers who had climbed Huascarán in the years after came back down with something specific to say. The unstable rock and ice on the north face of the peak was capable of letting go in a much larger slide. The next one, they warned, would not stay in Ranrahirca. It would go over the ridge that protected Yungay. It would bury the entire town. The provincial government did not want this news spread. Officials urged calm. They told people not to panic. And then they pointed to a piece of geography that made the warnings feel like fear-mongering. The ridge had a name, Cerro de Aira, a 200-meter spine of solid bedrock standing between Yungay and the head of the Yanganuco Valley, where any avalanche from Huascarán's north face would have to come down. Experts from Peru and abroad had already declared Yungay one of the safest population centers in the entire Callejón de Huaylas, specifically because of that ridge. The math was simple. A slide coming down the glacial valley would hit Cerro de Aira, slow down, lose its mass. The math had been done. A few years later, the Peruvian government even rebuilt Yungay's main church, a colonial-era building on a slight rise above the plaza. It was a declaration. Yungay was not just surviving, it was investing. The mountain was background. Yungay was a city. The years passed, the market resumed, the bread stalls reopened. Children played in the plaza beneath 4 palm trees. People walked to church on Sunday. And the mountain, which had already spoken in 1725 and again in 1962, waited above them in the thin morning air, patient as stone. The morning of May 31st, 1970, was a Sunday. In the Callejón de Huaylas, Sunday was market day. Families came down from the surrounding villages to trade. Bread sellers arrived early. Yungay bread was famous through the Andes. The circus was in town. The Berolina Circus had set up its tent at the stadium, on the eastern edge of town, and local accounts say several hundred children from the surrounding villages were due to attend the afternoon show. By mid-afternoon, somewhere around 20,000 people were in and around the plaza. The town normally held 18,000. The Sunday market had swollen it. People were packed shoulder to shoulder among the bread stalls, the cloth merchants, the coffee sellers. The plaza was full. The streets were full. The church was filling up, as it did before the evening mass. Among the thousands, there was a man there for a different reason. Dr. Mateo Casaverde, technical director of the Instituto Geofísico del Peru, had come to Yungay with a French colleague to install seismic stations, the country's instruments to track the kind of shaking that everyone in the region knew was eventually coming from somewhere. He was not there for the market. He was there because he was one of the few people in Peru who measured mountains for a living. Earlier that afternoon, outside town on the road between Yungay and Caraz, an American companion of his, H. Adams Carter, a climber who had spent years in the Cordillera Blanca, told Casaverde he was leaving for a few hours. His mother was visiting, and she wanted to browse the market and see a relative in Yungay. Carter said no. He was, as he later described, gripped by a nervous impatience he could not explain. He could not have known what was about to happen. He took his mother and went. He never saw Yungay again. At 3:23 in the afternoon, the ground began to move. The Ancash earthquake originated offshore in the Pacific, tens of kilometers west of the coast. About 45 seconds of shaking arrived in Yungay as a deep roar through the ground. Adobe buildings cracked, walls buckled, dust rose up off the streets and filled the air so thick that people covered their mouths. Men, women, and children ran into the church, packed the stone walls shoulder to shoulder, and began to pray. In Yungay, the earthquake caused damage, but not catastrophe. The shaking lasted about 3/4 of a minute. When it stopped, people began emerging from the church, from under tables, from doorways. They brushed dust off their clothes. They called out for their children. They checked on neighbors. Some of them, believing they had survived the worst of it, went back to their half-demolished homes to gather what they could. They had survived the earthquake. They had not survived what the earthquake had set in motion. For the next minute and 42 seconds, long enough to walk the length of a city block, long enough to brew coffee, long enough for a child to ask what was happening, a deep, low rumble rose from the east, something distinct from the noise an earthquake makes. It was the sound that Mateo Casaverde, standing on the road between Yungay and Caraz, recognized instantly for what it was. A bright-minded barber in Yungay heard it too. The sources remember him as a man who shouted through the dust, telling people to run for the cemetery, the elevated ground northeast of town, the highest point he could think of. Some people heard him, most did not. What was coming down the mountain was not what people imagined when they heard the word avalanche. On the sheer west face of Huascarán's north peak, between roughly 5,400 and 6,500 meters, a slab of rock and glacial ice about 1,000 meters wide and more than a kilometer long had broken loose. The earthquake had destabilized the wall. The mass fell 600 meters onto a glacier below, slid down its surface, and started gathering everything it could find. By the time it left the glacial basin, it was somewhere between 50 and 100 million cubic meters of rock, ice, snow, and air. Some of the air was trapped underneath, and the avalanche behaved the way a stone behaves on a cushion of water. It floated. It moved across the land instead of grinding through it. By some estimates, the fastest portions of the avalanche reached well over 300 kilometers an hour. The fastest projectiles were moving faster than any avalanche that anyone in the valley had ever seen. The mass roared down the Longanuco Valley. Most of it kept going, past the town of Ranrahirca, where it killed almost everyone who lived there. But a small portion of the flow crested the lip of the valley and turned toward Yungay, toward the bedrock ridge everyone had been told would protect them. Cerro de Aira, the same 200-meter wall that experts had pointed to as Yungay's great natural defense, did exactly what its shape was designed to do. It split the flow. It funneled a portion of the killing mass directly over the city. The geography that had promised to save them became the geography that delivered them. A wind blast arrived first. It threw people to the ground. It toppled trees. It flattened what the earthquake had merely cracked. Then the semi-liquid mud wave came through. It covered the plaza under roughly 5 meters of debris. It carried boulders the size of small houses down the main streets. It picked up the central district of Yungay and laid it down again as a thick, pale plain. From the road outside town, Mateo Casaverde heard the rumble and ran. He later described what happened next. He and the French geophysicist with him ran as if possessed for the cemetery, the highest ground they could think of. They gained the steps as the mud swept around their feet. They did not look back. In town, only those who were already at the cemetery hill and the children at the circus had any chance at all. Everyone else was somewhere they should not have been. The hill is small. Outside the town, a few hundred meters northeast of the Rio Santa, separated from the main path of the Yanganuco Valley by a low spine of ground. For centuries before the Spanish arrived, and probably for centuries before that, it had been used as a burial site. The Inca buried their dead there. The cultures before the Inca buried their dead there. The cemetery of Yungay was built on top of all of them because it was the place where Yungay had always buried its dead. No one had calculated the location for safety. They had not stood at the foot of Huascarán and measured the avalanche path, had not run the geology of a ridge they trusted implicitly. They had buried their grandparents there. That was the whole reason. On May 31st, 1970, the 92 people who were at the cemetery when the wave hit survived. None of them lived on the hill. The cemetery had no permanent residents. They were visitors paying respects that Sunday afternoon. The mud reached the second story of the cemetery buildings behind them. Those at the very top, on the platform where the statue of Christ stands with both arms outstretched over the valley, watched the city of Yungay disappear beneath them. They watched from under the arms of a Christ statue. 3 days and 2 nights passed before rescue came. They stayed on that hill, on ground that had been consecrated for the dead, and watched the valley fill with strangers looking for bodies that would not be recovered. Why the hill survived is partly geology. It sits above the elevation Cerro de Aira had scattered the flow across. In a part of the valley, the wave passed around, but the deeper reason is that no one had built there. By the time the avalanche arrived, the cemetery was still only a cemetery, a place people went on Sundays to visit graves, not a place anyone lived. That is the central irony of the geography. The place humans had designated for laying the dead to rest was the only place the living survived, a place built for memory, not for safety. The dead, in choosing where Yungay would mourn them, had unknowingly designed the only safe ground in the valley. Down in the plaza, where 20,000 people had stood 2 hours earlier, almost nothing was left. The Catholic cathedral, which had been packed with people praying through the earthquake, was gone. The houses around it were gone. The cloth market, the bread stalls, the coffee sellers, the town square where families had spent their Sunday. All of it was a pale, even plain of mud, rock, and broken trees, a few meters thick, hardening in the Andean sun. Of every 20 people who had stood in Yungay that afternoon, 19 did not walk out. The children at the Berolina Circus did walk out. They had been at the stadium on the edge of town, on slightly higher ground than the plaza. Local accounts remember a clown leading them to safety. The children's names and faces are a scattered diaspora, now resettled across several countries. They survived because the circus tent had been pitched on the only patch of slightly higher ground for hundreds of meters in any direction. The Peruvian government declared the buried site of Yungay a national cemetery, Campo Santo, an excavation-prohibited zone where the bodies of the city would lie with the bodies of the city. No digging, no recovery. The dead would remain where the mountain left them. Today, where the Plaza de Armas of Yungay used to stand, 4 palm trees grow out of the debris. Their trunks are bent permanently at the angle the wind blast forced them into. Their crowns have been pruned back. They still stand. They are the only vertical things for hundreds of meters in any direction. Beside them, a stone altar, an obelisk, a reconstructed facade of the cathedral that was lost, and a bus half buried in the exact spot the mud left it. Survivors have laid headstones for their families in the spots where their front doors used to open. The mountain is visible from where the cathedral used to be. It has not moved. It does not appear to have moved. Geologists have estimated that an event of this size may occur only once in many hundreds to thousands of years. The new town of Yungay was rebuilt about 2 kilometers north on higher ground. Every year on May 31st, the children of Yungay practice earthquake drills. The town that exists now exists because the town that existed before it is under a pale, hard field. 4 palm trees, bent at the waist, their fronds at half-mast, where the plaza used to be. The mountain above them has not changed. It never does. The mountain above your house has not changed either. It is the same kind of mountain, made of the same kind of rock, holding the same kind of weather above the same kind of valley. On the afternoon of May 31st, 1970, the people of Yungay found out what their mountain had been carrying. The rest of us have not had to find out yet. We have just been lucky. When you look at the mountains where you live, do they feel like scenery or like a thing that could move? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to the Origin Portal if you want to know what else has been quietly waiting above the places we trust.